Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Hashira Half Hour. I am your host today, Emily, and today we're starting off with a story time. I am going to go ahead and shout out Aniplex for their stellar customer service. So as those of you who hopefully have been listening for a little while know, the three of us went to the Demon Slayer Swordsmith Village premiere in Los Angeles, and our partners came with us, our friends came with us. It was a great time, and my partner Tom got one of the world tour shirts that like everybody got, and in the excitement and hustle and bustle of just kind of like getting shuffled through this movie theater with at least 2,000 other people, we just didn't really look at the bag after we left. And so when we got home, we realized that they'd accidentally given him the wrong size t-shirt, and it was just like way too big. So we emailed them and we're just like, is there any way that we might be able to like exchange this? We have the receipt. Like, we just didn't know. And they were super accommodating and they said yes. And so we actually just got that in the mail. We got Tom's right size shirt. And to apologize for like, just the miscommunication or whatever happened, they sent Mugen Train promotional art as well, which was so nice. Not necessary at all.
Oh my gosh.
Very, very sweet. So thank you, Aniplex. 10 out of 10 recommend. Order your figures and stuff from Aniplex so they can make the money. But
snaps for Aniplex.
So nice story. We love that for Tom as well. He's not here today, though. As always, I'm joined by Bryan and Hana.
Honestly, that Enmu in the top right corner, or top left because it's reversed. I love it. It's so good. Honestly, Aniplex for the win. Not only are they great animators, they're also great servicers, I guess. But I'm super excited for this episode. The heat is on, the boil is roaring, and we are here to fight some demons, folks.
Me too. Hey, everyone, it's Hana, and I am excited to gather together to talk about The Gathering. That was bad, but that's the best I could come up with.
Well, we're gathered. And as we're gathered here today, we begin our episode. And little Miss Nezuko, much like I am planning to be in about 2.5 hours, she's already asleep and safely stored back in her box. What's in the box? So in this moment, we cut back to Tengen and Gyutaro, and Gyutaro surmises that Tengen is someone special or is born with talent because he's already kicking some ass in this fight. Tengen disagrees and actually chides the demons a little bit for this belief and says that they haven't seen the real world and the vast people in it, and so they do not know what somebody truly gifted would be like. But this led me to thinking, why would Daki and Gyutaro choose to stay in the entertainment district? What do you think?
I think it's a good spot for them. They've been very successful there. They've talked about how many Hashiras they've killed each. I think it was 7 for her and 13 for him, I think is what they say. So clearly they're doing something right. And this is exactly where, Daki thrives, is here because she's gorgeous and she knows how to handle these kinds of situations. So I think that they are ignorant to the outside world to a point of they just stay where they know that they're successful. Why leave? Why go somewhere else when you have all of these probably very full of nutrition humans around and you can live in undercover so easily that it just makes you ignorant?
I mean, much like the American Congress, why would you go somewhere else if you can just stay where you are and do nothing?
Oh my
God. Nonetheless, though, I do relate to Tengen's statement in the sense of being called privileged and being like, you are so gifted. And I think it's a very quick nod to the fact and the reminder that you never know what really someone is going through each day to day, and you don't know the experiences that have shaped them to be the person they are in the moment in front of you. So while it's tempting to judge those very quick off the bat, you will be able to to eliminate some of that uncertainty really quickly as you get to know them. So just give yourself a minute to breathe while you take in whoever's new.
Side note, he mentioned that Moichiro literally became a Hashira 2 months after picking up a sword in that moment. Snaps for our boy. That's incredible. Tanjiro went through a 2-year training and he's still not even there. Just saying.
Gen Z breaking barriers once again. Oh my gosh. But these are all good points. And, it's definitely, I think, more complicated for them to try to leave than to just stay. Like you said, why fix what's not broken? And something that they're kind of familiar with, and like, an ecosystem of people that has been easy to dupe so far. Makes sense for them to choose to stay. Although, had they decided to leave, I wonder, would they have been able to find similar success somewhere else? Don't know. But they're pretty strong, so probably could have seen something. As we're seeing this flashback, or not the flashback rather, but we're seeing this interaction with Daki and Gyutaro, Tengen reveals that he is immune to Gyutaro's blood sickle poison because he's a shinobi and has built up resistance over time. And then it's at this point that we get a Tengen flashback and we learn a little bit about his troubled childhood. While Daki and Gyutaro claim that the shinobi were wiped out, and that's exactly something that someone who is not a ninja would say. Tengen went through grueling training, outliving many of his siblings. And then after going through all of this, he chooses to fight amongst the demon slayers instead of remaining a shinobi. He flashes back again to a time where he and his wives met with Uba Yoshiki, the leader of the Demon Slayer Corps, and Uba Yoshiki calls him a remarkable child for fighting against these own ideologies that have been drilled into his brain and into his body since the beginning of his life. It's really hard to go against your parents and to go against those beliefs and those systems that are taught from such a young age. And in some ways, this act of rebellion against his parents is a little bit similar to Hashira that we've seen before. What do you think?
I've been going against my parents since I was in high school. That's another day's work, folks. But really, to tell you the truth, it's definitely very different. Relating to the experience personally, the image of me being gay didn't really fit in with the, ideology of my family. So having to, really kind of follow in the same mindset of like, this is not the image that was set up for me. However, I understand that image was created out of perception of who I was supposed to be for someone else, not who I was supposed to be for myself. And I think that's the differentiation here, is that Tengen learned that lesson over time, is that he created his own kind of long-term goal for what he wanted to do for the world around him. And I think that's what's really important to kind of remember here, is that he does reflect on a lot of other things that have influenced him to do so.
That's good. I think I kind of see, like, not in as an extreme situation like Bryan has had, but I also kind of have like rebelled against my parents since I've like grown up and moved out, just like come to realize a lot of their ideology is not like aligned with mine and that sort of thing. But I think in Tengen's situation, it's much more extreme. I don't know if we're ever going to talk about this, and I don't even know if it's ever mentioned truly in the show, but I do know that it's canon that, like, in this moment, he mentions that all of his siblings except for one died by like the age of 12 or something along those lines. They were actually forced to duel each other by their father. And so they were like blindfolded, so they didn't know they were fighting each other. And it wasn't until like the last duel that Tengen was in, I think against that one brother that survived, that he realized that he had just killed a bunch of his own siblings. You have like that is something like you have to do something about that, like that is, no matter like what you come from, and if this is the tradition of the family for hundreds of years, like good for him for breaking that, because that is not a good tradition and that needs to stop, to put it lightly. So it's something that a lot of people can relate to. I think, our parents do their best, I think, but also I think each generation kind of learns more and understands more about how to raise kids. So it's something that I think we all go through in some way, is to kind of remove ourselves from something that our parents have done in the past, because we know that like we've learned from that.
Nicely put. And I agree. It's about like breaking generational barriers, and whether it's something more modern, like what Bryan has talked about or what Hana has talked about, or it's like just choosing yourself. As Tengen said, he is an interesting character in that he's probably the most selfish that we've seen out of just about anyone. But I think that this short dialogue goes to show that being selfish for the right reason is not a bad thing. So I wouldn't, while I of course wouldn't say that somebody as selfless as like Tanjiro is in the wrong for being that way, I don't think Tengen is in the wrong either for choosing himself and his wives first. And I think that answers a question we had from a previous episode a little bit more clearly. So it's a good moment with Tengen. We get this ideology, and as he's having this flashback, Gyutaro scoffs at him and snides that the poison is in fact working, though slowly. Tengen rebuttals immediately and jumps into action as he does, and he easily beheads Daki for a second time. She's just not having a great time, is she?
The poor girl. Oh my gosh. She's just wailing and complaining. And, you know, I feel that. She's like, everyone's ganging up on me. Why are you? Damn you. You got my head again. She's maybe not the smartest, demon that we've met. She's really, really still very powerful in her own right, but you can kind of see that her brother is really kind of the smart one and stronger than her, but being beheaded twice within the span of like 10 minutes by the same guy, she's pretty lucky. She's pretty lucky.
Yeah, no, I mean, Tengen was like, let me get 10 bowls of udon right quick, and then I'll also behead you. And I was like, my dude, like, how cold are you gonna be? You're gonna be like, I could literally eat some or tangent. But it's like that scene in Bridesmaids where she's like, I'm actually a little hungry. I could use a little snack. And she's like eating the Jordan almonds, just like sweating, dripping down her face in the bridal shop. That was Tengen right there.
Oh my
but
God.
Also Daki just getting straight wrecked twice in a row. Man, I feel like it's the epitome of the younger sister, and it's sad that I think she kind of falls into the same spot as Nezuko, with the sense of that she's in her siblings' footsteps, and so it's very difficult for her to really maintain the attention or maintain our focus when there's clearly something that's a little bit stronger and maybe a little bit more dangerous in front of you.
True. It can be really hard to follow in the steps. We're just talking about like all kinds of generational trauma right now, but it can be hard to follow in the steps of your older sibling, especially if they generally have been better at some stuff than you. But their relationship is interesting and kind of balanced, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, she's not doing so well. She's 0 for 2 at this point. So hopefully, maybe not hopefully, we're rooting for the other side, but like it would be good to get to see her hold her own against Tengen a little bit, and put up a little bit more of a fight, because it really hasn't even been a fight thus far. And there is an interesting obsession with udon in this show, isn't there? Now that you mentioned that, I'm thinking about that bowl that Tanjiro just didn't get to have like a full season ago. My boy. Let him have his soup. And then Tengen can have 10 bowls of soup, metaphorically. Although he also has zero soups. But soup aside.
They don't sleep,
no good
they
soup
just
here.
Eat. They don't sleep to get rest, they eat to recover their strength. That's what it is.
Oh, you're right.
Honestly, and that is on Naruto Ramen Man. moving on. We got to move on from the soup. Our Kamaboko squad shows up just in the nick of time, and Tengen commends them for their flashy entrances. Tanjiro uses his keen sense of smell again and recognizes right away that Gyutaro is on another level. Will flashiness, or 4 demon slayers for that matter, alone be enough to take out these 2 upper 6 demons?
Oh yeah, that was the question I was like picking at the entire time as I was watching this live, like the first time I ever watched it. Honestly, Mugen Train set me up with the expectation that at least someone was gonna know someone wasn't making it out of this fight. And I mean that may not even be just Mugen Train at that point, but that might have just been any anime. I was like, these two together, extremely powerful. There's 4 of them, sure, 2 per demon. However, I don't think the power levels of our heroes match what they're facing. So there's going to have to be a give somewhere. And to be honest, I didn't know if we would actually win this fight. I thought there might have been a withdraw at some point, especially as we get like to where we are in this episode. I'm like, there's no way there's some like follow through to the end where they keep fighting. Like I was waiting for some sort of reprieve or like, a dust storm or like a sound wave to be like, all right, we got 5 minutes, guys. Nezuko, get out here, heal. Let's do this.
Mugen Train definitely taught me to be not attached to any characters. And I did spend this entire last few episodes kind of wondering, obviously, like Tengen is poisoned at this point. He said that it doesn't really affect him, but it seems like maybe it kind of is. So like I'm setting myself up with the expectation that we might lose him, or God forbid someone in the Kamaboko squad. I think like my feeling at this point is the only character that's truly safe is Tanjiro. Like I can feel without a doubt that like he's gonna make it, and Nezuko. But I mean, Nezuko really can't die unless she goes out in the sun or a demon slayer beheads her, and we've already established that like the beheading is not going to happen. So can our 4 demon slayers take out these demons? I don't know. I think there's a lot of possible outcomes here. Someone could die and the others are successful. Maybe like they just get away and no one wins, but everyone survives. There's a lot of different ways this could go. And this is the first time that we're facing like a pair of demons that are the same rank. We've met multiple, like the family of spider demons on Mount Natagumo, but they were not all lower 5. These are 2 demons that are, even though Daki feels probably a little bit weaker, like technically the same strength. How are we going to make it out of there? We'll have to keep watching to find out.
Very true. Will it be enough? Are they a little bit stronger? Maybe. We're going to have to wait and see, because we know that what they're up against is already quite strong. Even before Gyutaro came in, Daki was decently strong enough to at least kind of ward off the 3 boys. Clearly not Tengen. We just talked about that. But if she were to get serious, I think that things could also look bad alone. And then you bring in Gyutaro and it's something else. So we'll have to see. But Tengen is already poisoned at this point, and even though he's tried to rebel against it, it's spreading through his body. As Tanjiro realizes this, and as we've kind of touched on just now, we see a slight, not flashback exactly, but like a reflection of our hero last season and my boy, Rengoku. We've talked about this before too, but Tanjiro suffers, I think, from a little bit of PTSD from this last interaction, because up until that point, his mental imagery of what a Hashira was unbreakable. And Mugen Train did away with all of that, knowing, as we do now, what happens to Rengoku. And so I think in this moment, the reality of the situation sets in for him. And as we've discussed, the Hashira are not safe or immune in these fights. Tengen is already poisoned, and there are 2 upper rank demons here. Do you think that there's any way that Tanjiro can still have faith that they can win this fight and come out alive?
I mean, Tanjiro always has faith. That's what he he strives in is like the ability to continue going even when his sword is broken in half or he has a stab wound in his stomach. And here, like, he is severely injured. Like, that shoulder wound is not exactly like a scratch or a cut. I think most normal human beings would not have lasted long after that, but like, he can stop his bleeding. So hope is one of his strengths. I do want to call out this when Tengen's kind of talking about it, and we see that like Tanjiro sees Rengoku kind of in Tengen in this moment. What a powerful moment. And I love how this show just continues to call back to Rengoku, that this character meant something to us, it meant something to the story, but most importantly, it means something to the main character. And it's clearly still really affecting him enough where I think in this moment, yes, you're right, it's like PTSD. Like, he's seeing Rengoku and he's like, what do I do? Like, I can't, like I want to trust this man that's here, but I am terrified that if I do that and I start to allow myself to like, you know, like have this friendship or whatever with him, what if I lose him too? Like, what am I going to do? He's already lost so much, you know? So it's like he's inside his brain. He's back and forth. He's hopeful, but he's worried, and he's trying to not make the same mistake twice. And you can just kind of see the wheels are turning inside his head. Like, he's coming up with every possibility, every way that they can get out of this alive. But right now, it seems like the only way to get out of this alive is for him to just be like, we're going to do this. Like, and that can only get you so far. So we got to come up with something better.
Yeah, I think with this one, I mean, me personally, as the viewer, I had mentally prepared myself for Zenitsu dying. Because here's my reasoning. When I first watched this, again, I was like, out of the three of them, yes, I think Zenitsu is the coolest because I like him the most. However, I do think he is also the least effective in battle. With that being said, I prepared myself to watch him die. Now, does Tanjiro have the, inspiration that they can make it out alive? I think at least he's going to not go down without a fight. At this point, we know he has taped his right hand, one of his hands, to the bottom of the sword, his left hand. Thank you, Hana. And then that shoulder wound, fun fact, if you didn't know, like police uniforms and military uniforms have this little lapel or this little like piece of fabric over the top of your shoulder that actually comes from medieval times and knights, because that is the muscle or one of the main muscles that you would use to swing a sword. Tanjiro literally has the main muscle that you would use to swing a sword, like literally broken in half. His arm is barely functional to hold the sword, but I mean, he's trying his best. I don't know that trying your best equates with belief, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to like let yourself die without trying. And I think that's what's the most important here is he's going to try just like Rengoku did. I don't think Rengoku walked into that fight being like, I'm going to die. Bye. But hey, sometimes it'd be like that as a demon slayer.
Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting, Bryan. I didn't know that little bit about the muscles, but very intentional. Another intentional choice yet again on behalf of the demon slayer storytellers.
I have always wondered with that wound, I'm like, I feel like that would really affect his ability to move that arm, which makes sense that that's the arm that he has tied to his sword, because like he clearly is lacking strength in that arm. So that makes sense. Thank you for that fun fact.
Very true. And if his mental resolve could be faltering at this moment, his physical resolve is not. He, even though he is beat up, he is willing his body to move forward. And so to some extent, that's also partially the mental resolve too, to get himself at least physically out of that rut. So our boys hatch a plan relatively quick, and they kind of determine what they're going to do. Inosuke and Zenitsu take on Daki, and that's going to leave Tengen and Tanjiro to take on Gyutaro. So as Inosuke and Zenitsu single Daki out and have her alone, Zenitsu is, of course, still kind of in his sleep stupor phase where he's able to fight really efficiently. And he demands in this moment that she apologize to the young girl from a previous episode that we saw her abuse. Now, what I'm going to get into here might be a slightly hot topic, might be a little bit controversial. And I think we might have some differing opinions in this group, even though we're all very close. But I want to discuss her reasoning that she gives right after. Daki tells us that she will not apologize to that girl because in the entertainment district, women are traded, sold, and treated as property. They are objectified. This is very in line, unfortunately, with how a lot of women are treated in the world still, and how a lot of them are portrayed in media and particularly in anime. Even Demon Slayer, in my opinion, is not necessarily immune to the unrealistic physical portrayals of women. What do you think about her calling this out when, in a couple instances, the show is kind of a victim of this too?
This is a really strong question because I think it tackles a lot. I think to kind of start, I think to a certain extent, it's like the exemplification of human trafficking. Like, while I think Daki did what was wrong, in the same sense, in that red light district, those are the rules of the environment that you're working in. So unfortunately, I see where Daki's coming from. Like, that is how that world works. And while I don't agree with the context it stands in, I think it is how the world continually works. And I think it's kind of that exemplification of like, this is not just something that happened so long ago, but it's still something that we can portray right now. And so I think Daki obviously lacks the compassion to understand where the money loss is not near as great as the trauma she caused. But I also understand that that is her job. Like, that is her way of survival, unfortunately. And while her way of survival really does get in the way of everybody else around her, it's still a difficult choice or a difficult call to evaluate what's right in that moment.
This is a good question. I totally agree. Obviously this is Taisho era, so this is early 1900s. The world has come a long way since then, obviously, but that was the way they lived. That was, like Bryan said, what she's saying here, we don't agree with, obviously. In the context of the story and what's happening, I don't agree with it, but I understand like that's technically true what was happening there. Like, this is literally like there's little girls, and he's talking about that little girl that was there, and for some reason, like, she's working here because she has to sell off a debt and she has to stay there. Like, they can't even leave. Like, we get the freedom to like resign from a job, like they don't. I think when it comes to like this happening in anime in general, and Demon Slayer, you're right, is not immune to this. Like, I'm not gonna like sugarcoat the fact that like Demon Slayer sexualizes women, and most anime does. Maybe it's a tiny bit less than like other animes that I've seen, because it's more of just they draw them to have very large chests, and they dress them to but they like take Mitsuri for example. We're going to see that like there's a story behind that, at least. So like there's something behind a lot of it, not all of it. So it's one of the better ones. I don't know how to explain it, but I think it is important for us to note. I'm trying to figure out how to word this. I'm not saying that I agree with this at all. I'm just throwing that out there. This anime is foreign media. We as Americans don't necessarily always understand things in anime, because anime is literally the Japanese word for cartoon or animated show. So soapbox for a moment, if you're talking about anime, it is a Japanese cartoon. Therefore, if you're saying Avatar Last Airbender is an anime, I kind of disagree with you since I started learning Japanese. That's another tangent we'll go off on later. But I think Japan does a lot of things right. I think that like I've been doing a lot of research, and we all know like it's much safer to walk the streets. The kids can do errands at like 4 years old. They start going to school by themselves because the streets are safe. There's been less than 10 gun deaths there like in the past year, which is like absolutely incredible. As Americans, we sit here and but Japan has this side to them that is obsessed with cartoon characters being sexualized, and that is still a thing. That, like, there are posters, you can walk the streets. There are certain cities that have found loopholes in the new laws that are supposed to keep situations like this town in this era from happening. I'm going very long on this, I'm sorry, but this is a good question. And it's like America's obsessed with sex too, I will say. Like, this is not like worse than America. But I think there's something to be said about the fact that it seems to be a little bit more an obsession with like drawn characters rather than real people. As far as I've seen, I could be missing the mark on that because I'm still doing a lot of research. That being said, Japan definitely has that side to it. They're very into sexualizing female animated characters, and we as Americans see that and just go like, well, what the frick, you know, when it's more normal in Japan. And I'm going way on a tangent here, all to say I think Demon Slayer does it slightly better, and I think Japan is still learning. They're also still somewhat behind the times. I think they're still not very big on tattoos there. They're not very big on gay marriage there. So it's like they're still kind of behind, and they're getting there, but they're not there yet, I think. That's what I'm trying to say.
I agree. I think that everything that you guys have discussed so far is really strong. There are just cultural differences that exist, and while we might not have the context to like fully understand or agree with everything, it's not our culture, and that doesn't necessarily excuse things that are wrong if they are just like wrong ethically. But as far as I'm concerned, some cartoon characters are pretty low on the spectrum compared to other things that could happen. So while the characters, and I do I personally think that some of the female characters are unnecessarily sexualized in Demon Slayer, I can agree that it's certainly not the worst that I've seen, and that things are progressively getting better. And at least a lot of the women in this show have a lot of agency. Even Daki is, you know, literally a sex worker in this show. So to me, her character design would make sense that this would be like in line with you know, like the outfits and some of the choices that you might have in that profession. She is still like a strong fighter and a strong villain that is not going to be easily forgettable. And, you know, while she's linked with her brother, she's carried the first half of this Entertainment District arc by herself. So, still a very strong character. And I would say like all of the women in Demon Slayer do have a lot of agency when it comes to their personalities and their strengths. It's just that they're drawn, you know, by a society that has a little bit of a history of doing that. And that's not to say that it's any better or any worse than ours, but it is just something that exists, but it is getting better. I just think it's interesting that she becomes self-aware of it in this moment and, you know, kind of calls it out, speaking about this young girl. Cool. Good talk. We'll be interested to see what some of the comments might look like for this one. I'm sure there are people starkly on either end of the camp, and then there's probably a lot of people in the middle too. So it's interesting. It's just interesting to think about. But at the end of this dialogue, Gyutaro's eye appears on Daki's forehead so that they're able to fight simultaneously. What do you think of this third eye or like evil eye imagery that we're getting here?
I've never really thought about it that deep, other than Gyutaro is just so strong, he's lending a hand to her. I think there's a level of, I can't remember if we've talked about this on the show or if this was a conversation that we had outside of it, but like Gyutaro has some kind of like slight control over Daki, it almost feels like, and I don't know what extent that is. We'll talk about it more. I'm thinking about a line that happens at the end of this season, but evil eye imagery, that's an interesting word, and I'm trying to like get my brain in that concept, because I've never like truly looked at it as something more than just like Gyutaro's like, here, have more power so you can know what's going on. However, I think it did allow her to literally see what was happening with Gyutaro's fight, which is allowing her to use her obi in two different ways. And she's now able to fight Inosuke and Zenitsu, who are with her, but also hold off Tengen and Tanjiro, who are fighting her brother. So it's like she's now in like two places practically, kind of like she was earlier with the obi. Sorry, I'm looking at my cat, who's being very cute right now. Another tangent. So I don't know if it's like imagery, but it's definitely making her more powerful.
Yeah, my take on this one. So if we all think back to that arc in Avatar: The Last Airbender where he's opening his chakras, right? And he's opening his mind's eye. First off, that's called ajna. That is what that chakra is known as. It's your mind's eye. It's what you see in the world. I think it's a representation of them furthering their own vision of what is right for them as demons in the world. And I think that knowing kind of at this point, right, we've seen that Gyutaro is a little bit, it's at least it seems like Gyutaro has a little bit more power and control over the overall direction of their duo, right? So I definitely think it's kind of that manifestation of Gyutaro saying like, okay, like I'm taking control over this now. I'm going to use like what my vision of getting us out of this battle is going to look like, and you just follow my plan. I think that's what kind of really connected them. I don't know if that's a part of his blood demon art, and then from there they were able to like because they shared some sort of like cellular connection, they were like having two sets of vision at once. That'd be fucking dope if that's true. But at least like that was their like, okay, like let's regroup, let's see what we're gonna do to take our like counterattack from here and like create kind of a future where we're making it out alive instead of these demon slayers, right?
And I think that's exactly it. It's like we keep flip-flopping between not necessarily the POV, but like I guess the thought process of either side of this fight. And so for me, that's where the evil eye imagery came in, was like for anyone who's not familiar with the evil eye, it's existed in like a lot of cultures for thousands and thousands of years. And the idea is that it's a curse, or like something that like a witch or a demon would inflict on you with like a malevolent or like an extraordinarily hateful and cursed glare. And so the evil eye is actually not necessarily the glare itself, but it's like an amulet or a piece of jewelry that's used to ward that off, because that glare is given when somebody's not looking. So I think this is interesting because it's almost like they're both at the same time, because for one thing, you have two demons. And so not only are, I think, they trying to give this glare or this like fight to the demon slayers, but now she also has this thing that's like possibly warding them off, because to the demons, these slayers are the curse. So again, it's like, it just kind of ties back to what we've discussed a million times, in that like it's Demon Slayer is really the story of the consequences of different choices that are made. And so like, are these demons purely evil? These ones might be a little bit worse than some of the others that we've seen so far, but are they wrong for trying to protect themselves? Not necessarily. So that was where my mind went to. I just think it's interesting, and I think it's intentional, at least a little bit. But yeah. So this is happening with Daki, and Inosuke and Zenitsu are trying to take her down. We cut back now to Tanjiro and Tengen, who are attempting to take on Gyutaro. Although Tanjiro is already injured, we've established this. His fighting shoulder is no good. He's moving more slowly than he was before. And as Gyutaro tries to land a blow on him, he is thrown out of the way by Tengen. He's like cursing himself for having to be protected and not being useful in the fight. And meanwhile, Tengen's like cursing himself for having been poisoned at all. What do you think of the dynamic of Tanjiro and Tengen working together in this fight?
I think this is really interesting because you get to see a little bit of growth, right? I think in each arc, we've had a moment where Tanjiro's gotten that one-on-one time with Hashira, right? The first time it was, he was quite literally laying on his own deathbed, watching, Tomioka come in and be like one-shotting Rui. Then we watched him get that one-on-one time with Rengoku. And at that point, he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna help." Yeah, can't touch you. This time, at least, he's like, "Okay, can't fight this one directly. I can give you some support around you." And so I think that's what's kind of important in this moment, is that Tanjiro is finally like, okay, like I can start to pick out what I can do. Even though I am not at the level, I still need to be helpful. And I think this is kind of the thought that maybe Rengoku wanted to instill in him in the like his final moments, is that like when you can be helpful, you should be doing whatever you can to support the fight against demons. And I think this is kind of Tanjiro's first moments to enact that feedback.
Yeah, I think Rengoku's words are ringing true for him. I think in this moment, like he's very injured and possibly just as exhausted and injured as he was when Akaza showed up in Mugen Train, but he has grown and he's gotten stronger. Before I talk about that, I feel like I have to mention this. This fight scene is the first animated fight scene I have ever watched. And I literally, the first time I saw this, forgot to read the subtitles because it is so beautifully done. Shout out to the animators. Spectacular animation in this fight scene. Just a little side note, but Tanjiro and Tengen's relationship that is blossoming in front of our eyes is very personal to me, because I like any like mentorship with Tanjiro, because he needs that. Like he's the big bro. He needs a big bro or like something, and he's gotten like little tiny bits of it here and there. But I think we've seen a lot of growth in Tengen as well, because who really liked him that much when we first got introduced to him? Not many of us, right? And we're seeing this kind of new side to him where it's not quite like when Goku was just like, don't bother, like you're gonna die if you try and help. Tengen is like, he's still in the fight and he still needs Tanjiro in the fight and he's still keeping Tanjiro in the fight, but he's doing his best to make sure that like he's protected while he fights. So he's like thinking of these all at once. And as they go outside, like he even talks about, like you say, like he's cursing himself because he's poisoned. He's talking about how he doesn't think Tanjiro's going to hold up much longer. It's amazing that he can as it is because of his shoulder wound. And he's just like thinking through all these things. So we're seeing that like he's also very battle smart, but he's being very protective. And I love that because we haven't seen that much from him yet. And it's just like these little moments, and it's creating a really good dynamic, and they're fighting really well together because of it, honestly.
I agree completely. I think it's going to be fun as we move forward through the show, and we're starting to see the precedent set what Tanjiro's relationship is going to be with all of these Hashira, hopefully over time, is like the idea. What can he glean and like what can he learn from each of them, and what kind of impact can they make? And we've talked about Rengoku's death not being in vain and that it means something, and like clearly we've already seen some demonstrations of that. And as far as the Hashira go, you probably couldn't get any more different from Rengoku than Tengen. But that's not to say that there aren't still things to learn on both ends. I think Tengen can learn from Tanjiro too. And I think that that's already beginning. So I'm really excited to get to see them fighting together. And even though they're like kind of cursing their own downfalls here, they're doing it together, which is really sweet. So here's hoping that they can pull through. We'll have to see the next couple episodes to find out. So Tanjiro and Tengen are taking on Gyutaru. And while this is happening, Hinatsuru is working in the shadows, and then she gets her badass moment here, and she hails a rain of kunai knives down on all of them. Gyutaro quickly works out that they are probably steeped in something, and we come to find out it's wisteria poison. As we've said before, poison is usually a woman's weapon, and so we see Hinatsuru get to use this. But something that's interesting is that Gyutaro also uses poison as part of his fighting tactic. What do you think of this dynamic and kind of flipping this idea on its head?
I really like this dynamic because I think it shows that being a poison user doesn't mean that you're weak in other ways. Because like we have Shinobu who like can't behead a demon, so she uses poison, which kind of like lends itself to saying that she's weak in other ways, but she's also extremely fast and is said to be able to beat Tengen in a foot race or something along those lines, like crazy fast. And now we've got Gyutaro, who's really strong, but uses poison. We've got Hinatsuru, who we haven't really seen fight yet. She was really injured and she was just showing up here. But I think it shows her strength that she was, recovering from poisoning herself. And she's carrying this like super heavy thing and she's going at it. Like she doesn't miss a beat with trying to throw these knives at Gyutaro. So I think like each one of these poison users that we've met have different dynamics, but I don't think any of them use poison just as like a crutch. I think poison just enhances what they're able to do. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. I think I have a little bit of a different take on it than Hannah. And I think my reasoning here is that the poison used by our protagonist is always this refined. It's always this like, to a certain extent, like, I don't want to say classy. And I mean, that's what it kind of gives me is like Shinobu's poison is like concealed within her sword, right? And we have that, as our understanding of it, right? Hinatsuru has like the kunai already seeped in poison. However, like the first poison like villain we saw was the spider on Mount Nanagumo. That was literally like something straight out of Junji Ito. It was like these people are transforming into spiders. They're like losing their humanity. Now we see, Gyutaro, who comes off really as this like egregious, really like sickly character. And I think the poison is kind of the exemplification of like where they fall in humans' values, right? I think Shinobu and Hinatsuru are using poison as the way to finish these battles quickly, to leave people or leave their enemies without agony. However, on the flip side, from our villains, the poison is meant to just do that so that they can get that like endorphin rush out of finishing someone off, which I think is a really kind of cool dynamic created there. Also, let's just take a step back. Tengen getting like knocked in the face with kunai and still going for it. Like,
oh my god,
bro, are
that
you
was
kidding?
so hot. I was like, that's kind of sexy.
All right, Paris Hilton, that's hot. I'm dead.
Too much.
Not us being like a few questions ago, like, let's be really thoughtful about if we think these lines are sexy. Listen,
we gotta have a balance.
Oh my gosh. It is a fun dynamic. I like that it's flipped the narrative that we've talked about on its face, and it's like the women are very smart and calculated, and Gyutaro is a little bit rougher around the edges, but he is pretty smart too. He's definitely got some battle smarts, and he's working out these things very, very quickly as he kind of narrates like his thought process for us. So he's got like the combination of both. He's got the brute strength and the smarts, and kind of almost like the second hit of like, then there's the poison too. If the blow itself didn't kill you, then this probably will. And it makes me wonder, like, is it possible that he's adopted some of those thoughts because of who he works so closely with? I don't know. Maybe he would take into account some of the things that like not only his sister but other women in the entertainment district would have resorted to, given what he was surrounded by.
I think it goes along with the theme too of how like much harder it is for the demon slayers, because like the demons have these otherworldly powers and the slayers are like they all they can do is perfect their ability to breathe. And so it's just kind of showing just how hard of a battle we really are facing. Because like, yes, Shinobu, Hinatsuru, like they can use this poison, but it does kind of like make up for other things that they maybe are lacking in with Gyutaro. Like it's showing like that kind of unfair disadvantage that they have, which makes it all the more powerful when the Slayers do win, if this battle were to happen in that way. So it's showing us like just how hard the Slayers are working, because like they had to perfect that poison. They spent years and years and years perfecting it and experimenting with it, while Gyutaro's probably was just able to be created because he's a demon. So, you know, we're seeing that like really, really, really hard work and effort, and then just a demon who's able to do it because he's a demon. So it's like that interesting power dynamic as well.
Absolutely. Well, this brings us close to the end. He's in a tough spot now, Gyutaro, between the wisteria poison, not being able to regenerate, and a Hashira and a really close to Hashira OP powered Tanjiro in this moment, seeing a chance, rushing in together. Tanjiro's got his blade to Gyutaro's neck, and then the episode cuts off and it ends. What do you think's going to happen next?
Bro, it's always so hard to know kind of what comes next in a Demon Slayer episode, right? Especially now that we've gotten a couple flashbacks in the middle of these fights too. So it's always kind of hard to predict, like, is this going to be like a motivational, like before the head comes off, like a flashback for power, or is it going to be like a you thought you had this going for you, but you really didn't. So I think it's kind of always tough, but like you do get that nice sense of like, okay, you know, at least they're striking back hard. Like the fight is at least balanced so far, right? We've talked about like the back and forth, but at least there's been some like exchanges for power. So you know the Demon Slayers are still hanging on. How tight their grip? It's slipping, let me tell you.
I remember the first time I watched this episode, I freaked out when the episode ended there. Oh my gosh. These shows are so good at like giving us cliffhangers after each episode. It's very different from like I grew up watching like ABC shows where the episodes didn't end on cliffhangers, but the season did, and now it's like the episodes end on cliffhangers and the seasons maybe like don't as much, like maybe like little cliffhangers, but nothing too crazy. So it's definitely a different dynamic. I prefer this way because it's only a week in between instead of like months. But what do I think will happen next? I mean, we seem to be possibly getting the upper hand because the kunai went in his neck and he's like, oh, I can't regenerate my legs. Tengen's going at him. Tanjiro is, you know, screaming and going at him. So we feel like, okay, this looks great. The next episode's name is Defeating an Upper Rank Demon. So we have a little bit of hope that means that we're going to defeat an upper rank demon, right? You know, that's what we feel like, right? So that's what I hope happens next. We'll find out.
Next week on Demon Slayer. On that note, I think it's about time to begin to wrap it up. We'll get to see what happens with our demons and our slayers next week. Any final thoughts before we move into our favorite moments? Sweet. All right. Well, favorite moments. I'll go first. And this was something that I had forgotten about until we watched it again recently. But a lot of animes do this. Demon Slayer does have after credit scenes occasionally, and there's a really, really nice one at the end of this Demon Slayer episode. And I don't know why I'd forgotten about it. Maybe it's, you know, just being guilty again of that like automatic skip feature on a lot of streaming services, but watched it again recently, and Tengen has a moment where he also sees the ghost of Rengoku in this after credits scene, and Rengoku reminds him to take care of the three boys. And it's just such a sweet moment. And I love that we get both stars of this episode, in my opinion, getting their moment again with Rengoku, because I think it just continues to demonstrate how important, albeit brief, his appearance was to the show, and that his death kind of sets into motion the rest of everything else that's going to happen. So take any time that I can get with my boy.
That scene does melt my heart. I also love how he's like, oh, take care of young Kamado, the yellow boy, and the boar head boy.
Yellow boy. Oh, shit. I was like, yeah, Hana. Okay, cool. Nonetheless, favorite moment here. I'm gonna go with Zenitsu walking up to Daki, because any moment where Zenitsu holds his ground against upper six, sorry, just had like 8 things connected in my brain. I felt like Jimmy Neutron. Moving on. I'll talk to you about it after we hit end. But right, he's talking to her in that moment. He's like, hey, like, you literally like almost ripped that girl's ear off, and you were pretty close, because she started bleeding because of it. Like, apologize. And Daki was like, nah, like, fuck your couch. And honestly, like, it was kind of sad, but I was like, damn, Zenitsu, let's go. I do also want to kind of not errata, but I also want to add to my previous answer, because I didn't really touch on the sexualization piece of that entire one. Definitely kind of something that I was kind of just like, yeah, that's anime when I first started watching anime, because my very first anime that I watched alone was Kill la Kill. If you don't know that anime, it's a high school like academy anime. It's got like 14 and 15-year-old girls that are in like Sailor Senshi outfits that are with like these over dramatic like scenes where like straps are like getting too tight. And then I've also watched like Kakegurui. And like the problem is that I love these stories so much. However, when I watch the sexualization of these characters, it's just like, God damn it. I'm like, come on, we could have gone without it. Like Naruto, there is so much stuff in Naruto that there would be absolutely no way this shit would hit the air if it came out today. However, like, you look at it through the lens of like, thank God we're no longer in these years, because my God. And I mean, even still, like, kind of like something along the same lines of what I'm talking about is the BDSM teacher from My Hero Academia. You know who I'm talking about. The
Midnight.
guy, the lady that, yeah, Mineta freaks out over her. Like, even she is like still pushing the boundaries, and she's supposed to be an adult as a portrayal.
My favorite moment is the flashy entrance of the Kamaboko squad. I love how Tengen's like, oh, you guys, like, talk about flashy entrances, and then he's like, these are my 3 Tsuguko, even though we know they aren't. Like, he's like fully like, all right, like, these are my boys, like, I'm gonna fight alongside them. Only a few episodes ago he was telling them to leave, and then he was gonna take it on himself, but he's like aware that he needs them. And they like make their entrances. He's super proud. He's like a proud dad. But I want to call out Zenitsu and his quick response, because like they arrived and there was like a little back and forth talking, very, very anime moment of talking. Like, Tengen's been really fast for a lot of this, but for some reason in this moment, they all just stand there and talk to each other. And I was like, okay, this is very anime, but we got to get some exposition out there. Daki starts to take action, and it flashes to Tengen really quick, and you can tell he wasn't expecting it. But Zenitsu just takes her literally like to the sky. And it was like, holy frick, Zenitsu. Like, he was the one who was ready. He was the one who saved the day. And again, a fun fact, I think I mentioned this earlier in the season when Inosuke saw Zenitsu fight for the first time. This is Tanjiro's first time seeing Zenitsu actually take action and see his breathing style. So that's why he's like, Zenitsu! Like, what the fuck? Like, he's shocked. shocked. She's like, that's what he can do? Wow.
That's not nice.
My watch just yelled at me. I'm getting too passionate. That was my favorite moment. That whole scene, but special shout out to Zenitsu. Gotta give him credit where credit's due.
100%. Good moments, really good episode, and it's just going to keep getting better, folks. But with that said, that is definitely all the time we have for today. I know we are well over at this point, but I think that we've touched on a lot of really important things that'll set us up for the next few. So thank you again for joining us on this journey. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please don't forget to give us a follow on TikTok and Instagram. We are at Hashira Half Hour. We are also on TikTok at Hashira Half, or on Twitter at Hashira Half. Send us some questions you may like answered, or let us know something else we should review on the show. As always, as my boy would say, umai.
Umai.
Umai.